Hello and welcome. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm Lisa Zangari, Vice President at the Leadership Louisville Center, where our purpose is to inspire and equip leaders to be better and do better. And we have been helping leaders connect and grow their confidence and their courage for over 40 years now. And these micro-learning sessions are our newest offering. They are an extension of our Leadership Green Room. Now, the Leadership Green Room is a suite of monthly leadership development courses. And every month we have at least one, if not two different courses that all focus on a different leadership competency. And this is all made possible in part by generous support by the Republic Bank Foundation. And they have also been our partner in launching these new virtual sessions as well. So to get the most out of your time with Justin today, I just want to give you a few tips on using Zoom. The first is that we will be spotlighting Justin as he is speaking. And so you will want to look in the upper right hand of your screen to make sure that you are on speaker view. And then all you'll see is Justin and his slides. And it's just a little bit less distracting than seeing the gallery view of lots of folks and friends. Also, we do encourage you to use the chat function for two things. You can just share thoughts or things that are really resonating with you along the way, but Justin also loves to take questions as we go. So yes, he can answer some at the end, but please don't hold back. You can submit those as we go on this journey together for the next hour or so. And finally, on the bottom right of your screen, you will see something called the reactions button. And if you are, wanting to give a bit of an applause or a thumbs up, you can try out some of that with the reactions button that you will see again on the bottom right. So that's all the housekeeping. And now I just really am thrilled to introduce you to our speaker, Justin Patton. So he is a leadership presence expert and a Louisville native, so near and dear to our hearts. And we have known him for years at the Leadership Louisville Center. He actually used to be part of our Young Professionals program, which is Ignite Louisville. He would lead a day, and it was always one of the top rated experiences. So we've always been fans. And he now runs his own leadership coaching company, and he is also a published author. So he has 2 award-winning books. He actually just found out this week, which congratulations, Justin, because your book, Bold New You, won the top award in 2020 from the Indie Reader Discovery Awards. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Justin.
Thank you very much. I'm just so excited to be back with my Leadership Louisville family and for all of you. So I don't know if you would agree with this, but I believe that every day is a lesson on trust in our lives. I want you to think about that. I think from the moment we get up, and let's say we order food and we go out to eat, we trust the food is going to be safe and that we're not going to get sick. I think every day that we get in our car and we head somewhere, we trust that the people on the other lane are going to stay in their lane and we're not going to be injured. I think we get up every day and trust that our boss or our manager or our family are going to have our back and they're going to follow through and do what they say. I'm such a believer that in life, every day is a lesson on trust. But for me, I learned my first big lesson at about 7 years old. So I grew up in this little small town of Mount Washington, Kentucky. It was really close to Louisville. And I was about 7 and I was in my neighborhood riding my bicycle. I was probably just being that little kid showing off. And I was barefooted, riding my bicycle with no hands, no care in the world. And at some moment, my toe actually got caught in the spokes. And I ended up, obviously getting injured pretty bad. And I remember being on the ground crying. And somewhere, I don't even know who did this, went and got my father. And my dad, I remember, comes and picks me up off the ground, carries me all the way back home, puts me on the sink counter in the sink and was, doctoring my toe and really consoling me, which was interesting because my dad was former military and he'd usually be like, suck it up, go on. And I don't know why that day he was just so consoling. And it taught me this really important lesson of how I've defined trust for the rest of my life. And I've always believed that trust is the confident belief that you're going to have my back and that I will have yours. Regardless of what's happened in the past, regardless of how mad we are at each other in the moment, trust is my belief that you are going to have my back. And so I'm really curious. One thing I know as an executive coach is, we all define words differently. So I'm really interested in the chat box. I'm going to share some what other thought leaders in the industry, how they define trust, but I'm interested in some of your all's thoughts of how you would define trust. So if you want to drop it in the chat box, put it there. But I think about a few of my favorite people. Obviously, I'm such a Brene Brown fan. She has a YouTube video called The Anatomy of Trust where she talks about it. But she quotes Charles Feldman, and she uses his definition, and I love it. He says, trust is choosing to make something that's really important to you vulnerable to the actions of other people. And isn't that what we do in every relationship? Whether it's personal, where we're going through something at home and we're feeling uncomfortable talking about our emotions because it's going to be vulnerable, or at work, we're behind on a project or we want to ask for a raise. And it takes that vulnerability knowing we don't know what other people are going to do with it. My favorite book on trust so far it's called The Trust Edge, and it's by David, I think it's Horsager, but he says, trust is the belief that in someone or something that they're going to do what they say, they're going to deliver what they promised, all of that. And then the last one I'll give you, and then I'm going to ask Lisa and Shelly to give me some of what they saw in the chat box. Relationship expert, if you've never heard of this guy, Dr. John Gottman is like the father of relationships. And he just says, trust is built in the smallest of moments. It's not these big things that happen. It's these little things over time that really help build trust. So I want you to take whatever definition really resonates with you, because regardless of how you define it, today I want to explore with you what are the key components that actually build it. So for me, I just choose to define as, we're going to have each other's back, and there's 4 factors that we're going to talk about how to do that. But these definitions are great as well. Shelly and Lisa, did y'all see any that kind of stood out to you?
I'm really liking the one that talked about consistency, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it's doing what you say you're going to do, but being consistent in that. But then there's also, some folks have talked about the flip side, right? So believing in people and looking for the best in everyone. And then there was one that was about trust is caring enough to hold the people accountable for being their best.
Yeah. You know what I love about that too, though, is it's so easy to hold other people accountable, but it's really also about holding ourselves accountable. Because I look back on my life, there have been moments, I hope there's not a lot, but there's been moments that I look back and I'm like, gosh, what I did in that moment, I see how it impacted trust in that relationship. I see how I wasn't as transparent with my boss as I should have been about that incident, and how that slowly over time eroded trust. And so I think it's when we're more aware about what is actually creating trust, the better all of our relationships are. And whoever said that in here about it is all about relationships, I totally agree. And this is why I've always said this comment about trust, that to me, trust is your most important competitive advantage. Because what we know is the more trust there is, whether you're a leader in a company, your people become more loyal, they're more engaged at work, they're higher in productivity, and more importantly, why? Because they're more secure. And when people have a sense of security, they perform better. Same thing in our relationships. When we feel that I know that you're going to have my back regardless, I'm going to feel more secure in that relationship. And as a result, every byproduct is better as a result. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. And in the chat box, if you've heard this, I want you to say, just put yes. How many of you in your life have ever heard time is money, especially in business? Yeah. Okay, look at that. I want you, my job today is to stop and challenge that notion and say, time is not money, that trust is money. And I'm going to prove it to you, because I've had experiences at places where they were fast and they delivered what they said they were going to deliver, but the experience was horrible and they eroded my trust. And as a result, I never went back. So we won't say who the restaurant is, but I went to a local kind of fast Mexican casual restaurant here in town in Louisville, Kentucky. And I wanted a cheese quesadilla, and I wanted it grilled twice because I'm that guy that wants to get extra oozy and crispy on the outside. And I told them I wanted it done twice. The girl's in the back fixing it. She hits it once, she hits it twice, and then it goes off and she hits it a third time. So I look at her and I say, excuse me, ma'am, I just wanted it done twice. Y'all, this is not me being dramatic. She goes like this. She goes, I know. And in that moment, I'm like, did this just happen to me? And she gets the quesadilla, she comes to the counter and just slides it really passive aggressively towards me and turns around and walks off. And I felt so dismissed by that employee in that business. So they got my order right. It was pretty much on time, but the experience just made me feel so dismissed that as a result, I lost all trust and I've never went back to that fast food place again. But then I think about companies like, for me, GoDaddy, Host Internet, it's all this technology stuff. It has been the best customer service I have ever experienced in my life. Every time I go there, I don't have to wait on hold. I get a person. They stay on with me through the whole call. Like, I trust that they have my back when it comes to my business. And as a result, I've talked about them. I've recommended them. And sometimes it takes them a while to resolve my issue. Time was never money. It was always trust that impacted the money and my loyalty and who I stayed with really long term. So I want to get your thoughts here. I want you to think about a leader you really admire. And when you think about him or her, what do you think is the number one action that he or she demonstrated to really earn your trust? If you had to roll it all up to one trait, what trait do you think that is? And I want you to put it in the chat box. Yeah, Kimberly, follow through. Yeah, I see a couple people saying empathy. We're going to talk about empathy a little bit later, so that's interesting. Yeah, listening. Good. Truth telling. We're going to talk about that. That word is real tricky. So yeah, growth. So what is the most important trait that you believe that it actually takes to really create that trust? All right. So this isn't in here, but I'm going to tell you my favorite quote of all time. So, and I usually share this in every presentation, but it comes from Oprah. And she says, everyone in life just wants to know three things. They want to know, do you see me? Do you hear me? And does what I say mean anything to you at all? That is it. Every one of us. All we want to know in our relationships, at work, everywhere is, do you see me? Do you hear me? Does what I say mean anything to you? And when those things are happening, we often gain trust in the people that we're around. And so I'm going to tell you about a guy who immediately created trust with hundreds of people. A couple years ago, I was sitting in the Denver airport on my way to do an event in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm sitting, you know, if you've ever flown and you're at the gate, everyone's either on their computer, their phone, or just kind of sitting there relaxing. And all of a sudden, a guy gets on the intercom and he goes like this. He's like, excuse me, if you're flying today to Indianapolis, Indiana, can you please raise your hand? Now, this is not normal. So everyone's kind of like looking at each other. And then all of a sudden you start slowly seeing the hands in the gate go up. And he goes, my name is Captain Dave Tuck. And he goes, I'm going to be your captain today. And he shared about how he was in the military and his experience with United Airlines. And he goes, I really like to know who's going to be part of my team before we get going. And he goes, the military taught me how important it is to be all on the same page. And he talked about how long it was going to take to get to Indianapolis, what the weather was like. He said, we might be 5 minutes late due to the weather, but we got enough gas to get to Antarctica. And he goes, I only have one rule today. And he said, my only rule for this entire trip is that you be kind to each other. And he goes, our flight attendants are on board. They have this plane looking spick and span for you. And he goes, we're really looking forward to seeing you on the plane, and I'll see you on board. And you all, when that man was done, within like 2 minutes, he got a roaring round of applause from everyone at the gate agent, or at the gate. And I sat back and I'm like, first of all, I've never seen a pilot do that. And I'm like, what did he do that just he connected with so many people that he doesn't even know? And we just literally put even more blind trust in a man that we just met. And it's because he demonstrated these 4 factors. So today, we're going to talk about, these are the 4 factors that really build trust in all of our relationships. Everything I've ever studied in leadership and trust, we can, in some way, it's going to fall into one of these 4 buckets. That what he did was he came out there and he shared his truth. He was transparent about how long it was going to take, what his expectations were. He was tactful and friendly in how he delivered it. But more importantly, he focused on this idea of togetherness. It wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about the flight attendants, and it wasn't just about the passengers. He's like, we're going to have each other's back. We're going to be a team on this flight. And when he did all 4 of those things, he instantly earned all of our trust. And so I also know we're human, and I know relationships can get really hard. So this is my kind of vulnerability question for you. I want you to think about yourself. And I want you to think about, out of those 4 elements, if there was one that you said, you know, this is probably my biggest opportunity for growth out of those 4, especially when I get mad or when things don't go my way, or I feel like that I'm getting emotionally hijacked. What would you say, and put it in the chat box, would be, out of these 4, this is the one that I probably need to be a little bit more thoughtful about? Yeah, I gotta tell you, this is fascinating. I've done this with hundreds of people now, and the most common answer has been C and D. It doesn't mean that transparency and stuff's not important and A is not important, because they're the basis, but I do find that it's time after time we're seeing people say C and D. I had a coach who once told me, she says, in every relationship in your life, there are 3 people. There's you, there's the other person, and then there is the relationship. And she said, there's going to be moments in life where you are so mad at that person, you want to rip their face off, you just want to walk out of the house, or any stuff like that. But she goes, you have to love the relationship enough to stay involved. You've got to be able to show up in that relationship even when you're mad, and do these 4 factors. When you tell truth and you're transparent and you're tactful and make it safe, and you focus on this idea of togetherness, that is when you have the most trust in your relationship. That's what I call the zone of trust. And the reason I want to share that with you all is because it doesn't mean we're going to get off this webinar and be like, you know what, I learned those 4 factors, I got this all together, right? It just doesn't work that way. But the awareness about when things aren't going well with a boss or an employee, or things aren't going well with your partner or even your kids, I would guarantee to say it's because one of these 4 things is not happening. And our job is just to say today, I hope we get to create just the awareness to say, I know these 4 factors create trust. What's the one that might be missing right now from my relationship? What's the one, or more than one, that's impacting our ability not to get back where I know that we can really get back to? And so often when a relationship's been severed, I call it's because of a trust trigger. I define these trust triggers as actions that just slowly over time start to erode trust. Sometimes they're big monumental things, but I don't think that's often the way that it is. So I'm interested in your opinion. In the chat box, what do you think are these small, like what is a small action that would be a trust trigger in a relationship that you've either experienced, or that and it could be even as a boss to an employee? Yeah, someone said lying. We're gonna see that. We're gonna talk a little bit about that. So that's interesting when Mary, that you say omitting information. I find that most people, when I studied body language from a lady in the FBI, when we talked about deception, what they find is most people don't just blatantly lie. They either tell half truths or they just omit some of the information. So you're spot on. Yeah, lying, no follow through, avoiding. So I want you to think about those. To me, here's some ones that I think about. I think when leaders reprimand employees without ever having any coaching before that, they have eroded trust, because they weren't transparent all along the process. I think about when we let things slide and we don't tell people the truth, or we're not really 100% honest about what we're thinking and feeling. That's a trust trigger in a relationship. Someone said not being consistent. I agree. And then I also think, like, here's an example. People that go missing and you go MIA for hours and no one knows where you are. That doesn't mean you were doing anything wrong, but you send people, we're going to talk about, on this emotional roller coaster of their own. Of course it's a trust trigger, and they're going to be sitting there thinking about what was going on, what was happening. So we're going to talk about these 4. Number 1, as I always say, that truth is all about your ability to really be honest. Now, put yes in that chat box if you have ever heard or been the person, and I'm going to be honest, I've been this person, who said, listen, I'm just a truth teller. I just tell people how it is. How many of you have ever heard that, at least in your life? I'm just a truth teller. I just tell people how it is. All right. What do you think people are actually saying when they tell you that? So what would you say when people say, I'm just a truth teller, I'm just telling people how it is? What do you think they're actually saying? Yes. Yeah, jump in here. Yeah, they're like, I don't know how to filter it. Yeah, I'm going to criticize you. Yeah, listen, in my 20s, this was totally me, super insecure, lacked confidence, but I tried to just put this like coat of armor on and go out into the world. And I would be like, I'm just a truth teller. And underneath that facade, I was a jerk. And because these are people who they might deliver their truth, but they have no awareness about how they're actually delivering that truth. Tracy, I know you know my story, so I wasn't going to share that one, but Tracy, all my Louisville, Kentucky folks, you'll get this when she says like, bless your heart. You all know that's what we do. We look at people and we're like, oh, bless your heart. You know, that's so passive aggressive, like you're an idiot, right? So yeah, but like we do these comments and we say these things that might be truthful to us, but often lack tact. So I'm going to say this, when it comes to the word truth, that is a really tricky word, because truth is not fact, and it is only based on our perspective. Brene Brown, who I just so deeply admire, and I'll talk about probably several times, she says, you know, we all experience the world through a lens, and our lens is made up of all these factors, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, income, education, all of our experiences. All of that is what shapes our lens, and our lens is what ultimately decides what our truth is. And it's interesting how we can experience the same exact information, but your truth is going to be very different than my truth. And I'm going to prove it to you. So I'm going to show you a picture on the next slide. And when I show you this picture, I want you to type in the chat box the very first thing that you see, all right? So whatever you see in that box or in that picture, just put it in the chat box. So here's the first picture. Yep. So we got all these people saying frog, absolutely. Anybody see anything different? Yeah, we got a few of them. Yeah, interesting that we got some people that have the same information, but some people see one thing, some people see another. If you don't see the horse, I am going to flip it for you, because I know people, when they see in the camera, they start doing this. It's hilarious to watch on the other side, right? But if you turn it sideways, which I'm going to do right now, you'll see that some people looked at that picture and they see the horse, right? And if you're still struggling, you can call me, we'll deal with it, all right? But the ears are on the top, right? The nose is on the bottom left. And I'm going to show you the next one. So what do you see in this picture right here? Yeah, we all see a face, right? Yeah, somebody said, I see the word liar, right? Yeah, you see either one or the other. So whoever said Gandhi, that is amazing. It was going too quickly for me to see, but I love that, right? Yes. So you either, if you look at the cursive lettering, it's the word liar. If you look at it just from what's on the page, it obviously looks like a man's face. I'm going to show you one final one. You won't be able to get this one because I'm going to flip the entire thing upside down. But if you look at this photograph, you see this bird. It has this little character in the bird's mouth, and it's on this little grassy knoll. When I flip this entire thing upside down, this is what happens every day in our relationships, in politics, how people talk about religion. We had the same exact information, but how you decide to interpret that and see that is just so different than the way that I do. And as a result, so often we end up, we either get in conflict or we have to have a difficult conversation that either goes well or doesn't go well. So what would you say, if you know that truth is really about perspective, what are the things that actually shapes our perspective? What would you say? Yeah, so much of it is our experiences. So either what we've been through, what we're currently going through right now. Gregory, I agree. I think your core values represent so much of who you are, and you're filtering so much of someone's behavior or conduct through your initial values. Anything else that you would say? There's probably one or two more for sure. Yeah, so Jeffrey, O'Brien, so family and hometown. What I'll say about what you're saying is, Jason said where you went to high school. That is a Kentucky thing for sure, because everyone asks you that in Kentucky. But what both of you, when you make those comments, it's so much about the people that you surround yourself with. The more you're around people, you're going to start most often adopting their viewpoints, or you're going to be at least thinking, I haven't thought about that. And so it's often also about how you receive your information. What type of information do you absorb? And so I'm going to give you one final quick story about truth and how my truth was all of a sudden kind of changed based on someone's comments. And I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was heading to Starbucks, and there was a lady in front of me, and we both have to turn left into the Starbucks parking lot. Well, when you turn left on Shelbyville Road, there's 2 lanes of traffic that are coming. So she sees an opening and she goes. Well, I'm behind her and I can see the cars coming, but they're pretty far. And I'm like, we got plenty of time. So I start going right after her. And as I start going and turning left, all of a sudden, as soon as she gets in the parking lot, she stops her car. Well, I'm in the middle of two lanes with cars coming. And so I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh. Like, and I start honking my horn like, go lady, what are you doing? And all of a sudden I see her look in the rearview mirror and she finally goes, and I go in the parking lot and I'm like, great, now I can't go to Starbucks because I've caused a scene. So I left that day, right? I go back the next day and I'm having my Starbucks at the counter, and literally all of a sudden this lady sits right to the right of me. And I can tell that it is the lady that was in the vehicle. And I was like, okay, I'm being tested here. I was like, I'm gonna say something to her. So we start talking. Her name is Nicole. She lives here in Louisville. Amazing, just amazing lady. And all of a sudden, as we're talking, we in about 30 minutes in, I was like, I'm gonna own up to what happened yesterday. And I said, Nicole, I need to tell you I'm sorry. And she was like, why? And I said, because yesterday I honked at you. And she goes, oh my gosh, were you the guy in that Jeep? I'm like, yo, that was me, Nicole, I'm sorry. So when I got into the parking lot, all of a sudden, anyways, I told her I was sorry. And she says, you know, you were the person. I said, yeah, but she goes, all of a sudden her tires kind of, hit that ground. And when she explained her truth, I sat back and I was like, it makes so much more sense. And my judgment and my criticism of what I thought this person just can't drive all went away. And it's amazing how our perspective can change when we give people the space to share their truth as well. So this is what I want to do to wrap up this section. I want you to list, if you were going to be seen as someone that is truthful, and you're going to be truthful in your relationships, whether professionally or personally, I did not see that pothole, Stephanie. What are some things or actions that you would do to be seen as truthful? What would you say? Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, yes, Tracy says, never say trust me. So you don't have to qualify it. Yeah, so you're vulnerable. Yeah, okay, so being authentic. This is where that whole vulnerability comes in. So yeah, follow up, don't beat around the bush, be direct. Holly, we're gonna talk about that. I love that. Yes, I want people to be direct, but we're gonna also talk about tact and how do you be direct, but also have tact in the process of all of that. I'm such a believer that part of being truthful is practicing candor, and that is about telling the truth, but also being direct with people. This is only one person's point of view. It does not mean that I am right, but in leadership, I struggle with those people that say the positive, give the criticism, say the positive, and it's that whole sandwich technique. And the reason I struggle is I've coached so many people that only hear the positive and the closing. I'm like, you missed the sandwich. What happened to the sandwich? And they only took the good parts away. And so I'm all about, when we praise people, we praise them. And when we have to give the constructive feedback, we give the constructive feedback, but we do it in a way that's still truthful and tactful so that we keep people whole in the process. Yeah, Holly, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Great book if you haven't read it. So wrapping up this whole thing about truth, Greg Creed, who is the CEO of Yum Brands, who just retired, he always said this, and I love this. He goes, own your truth, but know that your truth is not the only truth. And I think that's such an important lesson. And why I'm definitely a culprit of this, of how many times we've been in a relationship, maybe a personal one, where, we get in an argument. And why? Because it's a battle of egos and two people are trying to own their truth at the cost of each other. So second thing we talk about is really around transparency. And this is all about your ability to really explain what's underneath the decision you made, why you did what you did, all of that. And a few years ago, I was on Delta Airlines and I boarded a flight, you all, and the guy in front of me puts his luggage in the overhead compartment and then turns around and walks off the plane. Now, if you fly, you all know that is not common. No one puts their luggage on the plane and gets off the plane. You will be tackled by a flight attendant. And I'm looking around like, did anyone else just see this, or is it just me? And I don't know. At first I'm like, am I being punked? Like, is this really happening? And then isn't there a show? It's like, what would you do? Is that a show, you all? Like, what would you do in that moment? And I'm looking around like, is this the test? Like, am I the one? Am I like being called out here? And So about 5 to 10 minutes goes by. The guy never comes back and no one's saying anything. And now I'm starting to get really nervous because all the worst is going through my head. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what if it's, nefarious? I'm like, we ain't going down on my watch. Not today, y'all. And I was just like, I'm going to regret it if something happens, but I don't want to be the guy that causes a scene to the flight attendants and maybe the flight gets delayed. All of this craziness is going through my head. So right before they close, pretty soon before they close the boarding door, I decided, I was like, I can't go. I have so much anxiety at this point. I'm going to have to say something. So I get up, I go to the front of the cabin and talk to the flight attendant. And I said, listen, I am sure that this is not a big deal, but I said, this gentleman got on board, put his luggage up and walked off and he hasn't come back. And in my head, I was in the airport. If you've ever listened to the intercom, they're like, see something, say something. That's going through my head. See something, say something. And so I'm like, I'm seeing something and saying something. I don't know if this is an issue. And she explained to me that he is an off-duty pilot who's just going to be flying in the cockpit with the other pilots. Well, that all made sense, right? As soon as she said this, I felt all this anxiety go away from me. Why? Because I had clarity. And that is what clarity does for all of us in business or in our personal lives. When we don't have clarity about decisions or what's going to happen, it sends us on an emotional roller coaster. And we start creating stories that aren't even true. We start thinking the worst is going to happen. I went through one of Brene Brown's courses one time, and she says this. She goes, when people don't have all the information, they fill it in with fear. And it is often so much worse than it really is. And I think that is so dangerous for any relationships, whether it's with kids or intimate ones or at work. When we make decisions and we're not fully transparent about the why behind the decision, then people are sitting there going, well, is this person out to get me? What does this mean for my job? Am I going to lose my job? What's going to happen to my family? And we start going through this emotional roller coaster that honestly is unnecessary as much as it needs to be if people would just be transparent. I always say this in my first book, Bold New You, I talk about coaching and listening below the waterline. So when you make a decision, you might say, listen, we're going to have to do this decision. That's what you say is above the water. But so much of what's not being said is what is below the waterline. This is what needs to be transparent to people so they don't have to agree with the decisions made, but they can understand why your stuff is happening the way it's happening. What type of information would you all say is below the waterline? So we're making decisions or something's happened in my relationship and you said, if you went to your partner and said, I'm just really unhappy right now. That's your truth, right? But what is happening underneath that waterline? Yeah, Gregory, I love that, right? I'm going to totally use that moving forward. It's the backstory of kind of what someone is saying. Someone said their intentions. Yeah, what's the root cause, the motivations, all of that. And similar, I say, we talk about emotions and feelings. And I've always said all emotions serve a purpose. And they teach us about ourselves and what's really going on. And when people can't have the vulnerability and the confidence to have that emotional intelligence to talk about their emotions, they send themselves on an emotional roller coaster and everyone else in their lives. You said the backstory, that's the why or the story. And I would even say the impact that someone's behavior maybe has on you and what needs to change. So all of that. And I know all parents, I know a lot of you, I can't see everyone right now, but if you're a parent, in the bottom right corner, I think there's a reactions button. If you have a reaction, I want you to just give me put the thumbs up if you're a parent on here. I want to see. Okay. Parents, be warned because this is you. You are going to have your kid at some point be like, can I go to a friend's house? And you're going to say no. And then they're going to say, well, why not? And what do so many parents say in response? You know this answer. Come on. Yes, right? So many parents are like, because I said so. And you know what? That works as a parent because you can lead out of authority. You can lead out of control. But it is not going to work with people in business too often. It'll work, but you ain't going to get commitment from people. You'll get compliance. And so I'm such a believer. Again, your kid doesn't have to like the answer. It could be because I'm tired and I don't want to take you. But I do think when people get the clarity and they understand the reason why, I think our relationships become healthier. And the last thing I said about this too is I'm such a believer that when we make decisions as leaders, especially more in a business context, that we explain to people what the impact of that decision is, or anchor that to something deeper. So I have to give, sometimes some hard feedback to people. And I'm always trying to explain, let's talk about the impact that has to you and your brand. Let's talk about the impact that it has on your relationships with your peers or with your team. And what I have found, and this is only in my coaching experience, if most people that show up one way at work show up that way in their personal lives, you do not flip a switch. And if you do flip a switch, it's even more problematic because you're not being authentic with people. You're not there's a great Harvard Business Review article called Discovering Your Authentic Leadership. And it says, basically, can you tear down all the walls in your house and still be the same person? That's authenticity, that I don't play a part everywhere I go, that I at my core am still the same person. And so I think we got to do a really good job helping people understand what's the impact to them, their relationships, the business, the family, all of that when we're being transparent with people. So let me ask you this one, same thing we did before. If you were going to be transparent with people, what are specific actions that you would take to kind of be seen as someone that's transparent? Yeah, Antoinette, we're going to talk about being kind because yes, that's going to be so much into the whole thing. We're going to talk around TACT, which is next, but you're right. Yeah, being upfront about everything. Jason explaining the why behind all this. Yeah, share how Cassidy, I love that. Explaining how I came up with this decision, explaining why I'm even talking to you about this. Yeah, not hiding anything, all of that. Good. Melinda, this is interesting. You said giving lots of space for questions. And I love that because I think so often we're going to share our truth with other people. But when people that are controlling are going to want to just like, I'm going to share my truth and that's the end of the conversation. And what you're saying is part of telling your truth and being transparent is I'm going to do that for myself, but then I'm going to come back around and I'm going to give other people the space to do that as well. Really important. Part of that's the idea of togetherness, but you're spot on. Yeah, so I always say, right, it's explaining the why, admitting mistakes quickly. Y'all, we all going to mess up. I have been there. I teach this for a living and I still don't get it right 24/7. With the awareness, I get it right way more often than I ever did in the past. But when I mess up, I will be the person that comes to you and says, I'm sorry. I screwed that up and I shouldn't have acted like that. Part of that's being the transparency, having transparency enough about my own actions where I can admit it. And then the only other thing I would say in business, or no, I would even say relationships, is making yourself available. Remember my favorite quote, do you see me? Do you hear me? Does what I say mean anything to you? And when we show up for people and make ourselves available, we're being more transparent. So I always think that truth without transparency is dangerous because you're going to send people on that emotional roller coaster that's really unnecessary. Remember, clarity takes all of that stress and tension and often lets it go away. I've dealt with in my own life and in some of the people I've coached, they went through really hard breakups. And I remember if you've ever went through a really hard breakup, you might be sitting there going, why did it happen? And I want some answers or all this. And I was searching so hard for clarity from someone who would never give it to me. And transparency sometimes is we've got to create, sometimes when you know you're not going to get it from a leader or from another person, it is up to you to create the clarity that you need so that you can move forward when you know that people can't give it to you. So, and as leaders, and I would just say this for all of us, anytime that we're in a relationship, we owe it to the relationship, even when we're mad with the other person, to be as transparent as possible if we're going to create the trust that we want in the relationship. The third one is around, now a lot of you said, the ones that you needed to work the most on were tact and transparency, or tact and togetherness, which is where we're going to go. And so tact is all about your ability to manage your intensity. I had the opportunity to interview the president of Taco Bell International years ago, his former president. Her name was Melissa Laura, and she'd been in the business for over 30 years, just led hundreds of people. And I asked her, in your experience of over 30 years in leadership, what is the biggest or the number one reason that holds leaders back? And she did not hesitate. She said immediately, they let their intensity get in their way. She says, you know what? Passion can be distracting at times, but she said intensity is destructive. And one of the questions I always ask myself is this right here. I always say, does my presence make it safe for people to tell me the truth? And that's hard when I'm in a conversation where I want to be right, where sometimes where I believe that I'm right, right? Does my presence really make it safe for people to tell me the truth in this moment? So much of it, obviously, I think I mentioned earlier, I studied body language from a former FBI agent. And part of that is understanding how our body language is actually coming across to people, how the words that we're using, are they rooted in judgment and shame dealing? And so I always use this example. I think that how we communicate in life is on this intensity line. And you're either showing up in kind of three spaces. You're either showing up in this very passive way where, you know what, you're going to probably not tell people what you really need to tell them. And do you know what's interesting about this, y'all? When I'm speaking to, hundreds of people or thousands of people in an audience, I'll usually ask in the audience, how many of you have a conversation that you probably need to be having with an associate or someone in your personal life that you've been putting off? And the majority of the people in the room all raise their hands. And when you ask them why, what do you think, put it in chat box, what do you think the reason is? What would be the only reason that you don't speak up and have the conversation? Yeah, you got it. It's all fear. And so fear is always going to pull you to one of these extremes. So one way is you're going to be passive and you're like, you know what, I don't even want to deal with this. And so you don't share that. Or the other thing is we go to the completely opposite side and we become really aggressive and controlling. I shared in here, we won't have time today, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of context. I'm such a believer, the number one factor that will erode trust in all of our relationships is ego. And here's why. It's all fear-based, and it always pulls you out of the best version of who you really are. Your ego always sends you into an extreme version of yourself. So sometimes it makes us play the victim, like I can't do this, my relationship's over, my boss doesn't respect me. Or it catapults you to the other extreme where you're like, you know what? My truth is the only truth, and if you don't agree with it, you're an idiot. None of us show up our best in these extreme versions. The best version of us is always this space in the middle. That's where TACT happens. And I just want to give you a few strategies. For me, when I'm really learning, or I've learned to be more tactful, someone mentioned emotional intelligence in the comments. If I was ever to give you one tactic that you want to do to increase your emotional intelligence, it would be to master the pause. Because what happens is when we lack impulse control, we immediately go into the topic and we start acting in ways without thinking about our decisions. We know that when we get emotionally hijacked and it floods the frontal part of our brain, which is the neocortex, now we're in fight or flight mode, passive or aggressive, and none of us show up our best that way. When we can pause for just a few seconds, it allows us to get back to the rational part of our brain and hopefully make a more informed and a healthier decision for the relationship. There's a great communication book. It's called Nonviolent Communication. And it's like, how do you communicate in a way that doesn't shame people? Brene Brown used to say, she goes, you cannot shame people into changing their behavior. And we do that all the time with people that are maybe smoking, or people with weight issues, or people that we don't perceive as good leaders. It's so often we try to shame people into changing their behavior, and it never works. So the other things is, does my communication, does it really have no judgment in it? And it's just about my truth and transparency. I had a boss once who said, here's what I want you to do. Because I get so passionate, you all can see I'm like all over the place. My boss said, I want you to practice wearing concrete boots. She goes, when it's really like, when I know that I'm in it or I'm getting hijacked, it's like I plant my feet firmly on the ground. And sometimes I actually purposely sit back in the chair so that I can't sit on the edge and my arms don't start going. So I have to literally tell myself, pause and have your concrete boots on. And it forces me to listen to this person even more. The number one way to overcome your ego is to stay curious. You can't have an ego when you're curious, because your ego is going to want you to be right. And so when you're curious, you're like, I don't know if I don't agree with this, but I'm interested in why you believe what you believe. And I'm staying curious about the process. So what are some things that you all would say? Yeah, Marshall Rosenberg is the one who wrote Nonviolent Communication. Thank you. What are some actions that you all would say that you would do if you're going to be tactful? And you all, you have some best practices that you've done. What's worked for you when you're in a relationship or you're trying to communicate with somebody and you're really trying to be tactful? What would you say would be one of them? Yeah, Tanya, help me understand, right, from your perspective. Alan, when in coaching, we say that, I always try to say that you need to own your truth, but it's just as much, you got to own the silence and get really comfortable in the silence as people are thinking through that. We don't need to feel that. Yeah. Asking questions, tone. Yeah, Lisa, it's interesting you brought up tone. So much of, like when I'm presenting, I'm loud and I'm kind of trying to draw in a whole room. But could you imagine if I acted like that in a one-on-one coaching conversation or in my own intimate relationships? It would never work. So part of it's our ability to step back and say, let's talk about this. I'm going to give you a quick, just because you brought that up. I don't share this too often, but my sister one day had just bought brand new tennis shoes and started going to the gym. And she got home from the gym and her big toe was a mess. I guess she was breaking the shoes in. And I know that empathy will be my life's work. It takes me a lot. I work really hard to be empathetic with people, and I really try. But with her, I sometimes play it as a joke, as a way to practice. So I went and got her a Band-Aid. I brought her the Band-Aid for her toe, and I look at her and I go, wow, sis, it seems like this is a really challenging day for you. But I solely said it in such a way that was like, it's clearly a joke. And she says, without thinking, she probably got hijacked, and she goes, see, this is why you're single. And if I could have drop kicked her in her esophagus, y'all, I would have drop kicked her in her esophagus. In that moment, this was the moment where you're going to be tested. When someone says a comment, and honestly, I don't even know, it wasn't like her, which is totally why it surprised me. And I was like, pause, like this is the pause. Oh, Justin, you better pause. All right. And then I looked at her and when you said tone, this is what made me think of it. I looked at her, I did not raise my voice, and I said, wow, sis, I think I'm surprised that you would use something that's vulnerable, to me, against me. And we ended up having a great conversation, but she was on defense for a good minute or two. And I asked her later, I was like, why did you keep getting defensive? She said, she knows the old me back in my 20s. Now I'm 40, right? But she goes, she was waiting for me to draw something out of her baggage and come throw it back at her. And isn't that what happens in relationships sometimes, where somebody comes to you with an issue and you're like, you don't like what your partner said or what your friend said. So you know everything about them. So you reach back in their baggage. And now you're going to throw it in their face. And I refused to do that with her. And so I just said to her, I never got loud. I never got defensive. And as a result of having tact, the conversation or the emotion de-escalated so quickly. And then we were able to have a really healthy conversation. And we got in the car and went to my mom's, and then we're laughing at each other the whole way. But had I not responded that way, we both would have got defensive. She would have got mad and left, and nothing would have gotten resolved. It was tact that really allowed us to have a healthy, honest conversation. I did not create this. Someone said this. I can't find who said this line, but I love this quote. It says, truth without tact is cruelty. And that is so true, that it's great that you can be a truth teller. And I want you to hear me. I want all of you to be able to show up and share your truth. But I also want us to be able to do it in a way that keeps people whole and makes people feel seen and heard and validated through that process. And so the last one is really about this idea of togetherness. And this, to me, all relationships start to break down right here. This is the moment that they break down, is when you decide, you know what, I'm going to do an action, whether conscious or unconscious, that's going to start to put me before the relationship. Even when I'm mad, I always put the relationship first. So I always define togetherness as this idea, this belief that you're not in it just for yourself. And remember, I define trust as it's my belief that you're going to have my back, that you're going to have my back even when we're mad, even when even when we go to bed and we're angry or whatever, that you're still going to have my back in that process. So now some of you I know there's several of you on here that have been through my session before. So if you know this answer, I want you to hold off just for a second. So Tony Robbins did a study a long time ago, and they asked couples that had been married and together for really long periods of time, what was the #1 trait that kept them together and happy? Now that's the key word, because you can be married and be miserable. You can be married and be alone. And they wanted to understand, what do the couples that are happy do differently than everyone else? And they found there was only one factor. What do you think it is? I'm going to give you a second to reply. Yeah, so many people say communication, letting things go. Yeah, praying together, understanding, selflessness. Yeah, laughter. I mean, I am a believer in that. There's a comedy club in Irvine, California that says life is too important to be taken so seriously. And I try to live my life by that sometimes, right? Like, it's okay to just laugh and not take yourself so serious. Good. Yeah, accepting each other and where each other is in their journey. Kimberly, I love you. She's like eating and drinking. That's what gets you through it all. Okay, right? All right. So the #1 thing that held these people together was they kept giving to each other where every other couple had actually stopped. Because I think, take it back when you first meet someone. And let's play it out in an intimate relationship where you first meet someone, and I'm a big believer, your job is to make them feel sexy, valued, and special. What are some of the actions that you do that you give to that relationship to make people feel seen or heard? What are some of the things that we do? If we're making people feel seen or heard, what are some of the actions that we actually do? Yeah, so you do some of the things that they like to do, even if it's not your favorite, because you're putting the relationship above yourself. I love that. Pamela goes, wait, is it Pamela? Oh, Tracy, I hug my husband daily, even when I don't feel like it, right? Yeah, so you're investing into the relationship, even on days that might be a struggle for you. Listening, y'all talked about effort. We open the car door, we send them a message. When I do this event face-to-face, sometimes I'll actually have people grab their cell phones and I'll have them send a text message, make an emotional deposit, which we're going to talk about, to someone in their personal lives. And I'm going to tell you, the response is always very fascinating. And so if you don't, many of you probably have heard Stephen Covey, big leadership guy. I'm such a believer in this concept. And he talks about emotional bank accounts. And he says, every relationship in your life has a bank account that is built on trust. And he says, it is our responsibility to the relationship that every day, every week, that we're putting deposits in. Because we're human, we are going to screw it up. And we have to hope, not even hope, we have to make sure that we put enough deposits in that when it gets bad and we're going through that rough patch, that we don't make a complete withdrawal. And so here are some actions that I put that, what are some types of these emotional deposits that we put into people? We spend time, it's all the stuff that you all said. We listen, we spend time doing things they like. I did this, I always say, we go out and we do things. We throw a party, we tailgate to each other at a sporting event, if that's what you like. We spotlight people on social media in the company to give them the recognition they deserve. And so, it's interesting, Greg Creed, who's, again, the best leader I've ever had the chance to work with, he always said, if you ever have to give up who you are for a person or a job, you're with the wrong person and you're in the wrong job. And so it's able to, letting people show up as their full self. That's an emotional deposit that we do in organizations all the time. I am such a believer that relationships end when people become emotionally bankrupt. My trainer, who I just really admire, I was talking to him one day and he said, my parents got divorced after 14 years and his father set him down and he said, son, I don't know what happened. I did everything I could. I provided, I tried to be there. And what his dad was just never able to get was he provided financially, but she was emotionally bankrupt years ago. And people always leave when they become emotionally bankrupt. And so you stopped focusing and you stopped giving on the relationship, and you were either just transactionally providing or only focused on yourself. And that doesn't mean people are bad people all the time. I don't think sometimes we're even aware that we're doing it. It just means that we've got to be really intentional about investing in the relationship and not having these trust triggers. They're going to start to erode the trust over time. I always say for organizations, your employee one day might look at you and say, I feel like I've given more to this company than they're giving back. it's time for me to step away. Or you as a leader might say, I feel like we've invested more in this employee than they're giving back to us as a company. And that's when we decide to let people go. All relationships end when people become emotionally bankrupt. And so part of this idea of togetherness is the fact that we say, we're going to be in this together. So what are some other actions that you all would say that people can do if they were focused on this idea of togetherness? Do you have any ideas or any thoughts there? Oh yeah, Holly, that's a good one. The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Yeah. Okay, so that, and you know what, that's interesting, Holly. That to me is about meeting people where they are. My former pastor here in Louisville, who just went to a new church, he used to say, you can't meet people where they are when you think you're above them. You can't meet people where they are when you think you're above them. And that is so much that idea, right, of like 5 love languages and meeting them where they are. Yeah, this is where, when you all talked about empathy, this is where it goes. Honoring people's boundaries. Yeah, really like digging below that waterline to really listen to people. And so I always say that truth without togetherness is self-serving. And anyone that wants to be in a relationship as a leader or in their personal life that's really healthy, they're always going to focus on this idea of togetherness. I so believe that the best leaders always communicate to really build trust, not compliance from people. And they do that by focusing on being truthful, understanding how to be transparent in how they deliver that truth, being tactful, and focused on this idea of togetherness. So as we wrap up, I hope that's given you some awareness and some ways to think about how you show up a little bit differently. I want to do 2 things. One is, if you'll just throw in the chat box, what is like the #1 lesson of like, because you don't want to take everything away. That's not practical. If there was one thing that you said, I'm going to implement this within 48 hours, and I'm going to try this to see what comes of it, what would be like your breakthrough that you're going to try to, implement within the next 24 to 48 hours? Yeah. Stephanie, I didn't mention this, but when I sit in these workshops, I'll have people send a text message to their partner saying, hey, I'm just thinking about you. I had a quick break. I just want you to know I love you. Do you know the response they most always get is, you okay? Anybody dying? And it's like, that's an indication that you've changed your behavior. That's not your norm. So yeah, giving those emotional deposits. Master the pause, baby. That's it. That's exactly it. Being more transparent, wearing those concrete boots, can't shame people. So I want to end with this. I hope that you will leave and that you will apply at least one of those things that you learned, because I'm such a believer they will impact all of your relationships. I put some stuff, we're going to send out a handout to all of you that kind of summarizes all this. I put together some more resources. If you want to stay connected with me, I try to send out one blog every month or every 2 months. All you have to do is just text 66866. And if you just put in the little subject, bold new you, all one word, it's going to say, hey, thanks for joining today. Put your email in and you'll be signed up. You'll see right there in the middle, that book, it says Leadership Presence. It's my new book. I get to launch it in about a month. So we're going to be launching that. And so if you're signed up and you're kind of connected with me, you'll get some information. Or just follow me on social media. I'm always going to post videos and resources that hopefully that you can use to just be a better person in how you show up or how you lead and just in the companies that you work with. I'm just such a believer. First of all, Leadership Louisville, I just want to say thank you. I obviously have partnered with you all for a while, and I just love what you do for our community, but now even more importantly, even broader, now we have someone here in Sweden. So we're going global here. So I just appreciate the work that you all do, and I'm honored to be a part of that work. For everyone watching, I'm all about people showing up as their full, authentic self at work and at home. And so I hope that these 4 ideas and these 4 elements help you show up in your relationships and create the type of relationship that I know that you really want. So if no one tells you they believe in you, I believe in you, and I hope they help you and serve you in your life. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Well, Justin, we believe in you too. And thank you again for being so generous with your time. And, you're doing this for free and you're filling us up and fueling us, and we're so appreciative. So many wonderful takeaways. I will be following up with everyone that joined us today via email to share a couple of things. One, the 1-page summary that Justin is graciously sharing so that you can refresh yourself on the session, but also a link to a recording of his session should you want to go back and visit that, or please feel free to share with others as well. Now, Justin will be back, hopefully live and in person in December to teach a full day in our leadership green room on difficult conversations, your reaction, your choice. And if we can't all be there together, then I know that we will we'll pivot and we'll make it happen some way, somehow. And with that, may you and all of your loved ones stay safe, stay healthy, and take care. Thanks again, guys. Have a wonderful rest of the week.
See y'all.